Listeners, imagine your daily commute. The familiar sounds, the crowds, the rush. Now, imagine boarding that last train of the night, the one you barely catch, only to find the route has changed. The destination is nowhere you recognize, and the passengers, they're not quite there anymore. Tonight, we invite you aboard the Phantom Commute, where the journey begins only after life ends. Prepare yourself. The doors are closing. Part 1. Arrival on the unseen line. The clang and shudder of the train doors sealing shut behind him felt unusually final. Michael Sterling leaned against the cool metal, catching his breath, the stale, recycled air thick with the faint, unidentifiable scent of old dust, and something else, something cold and metallic. Had made it. Just. The quarterly review meeting had bled into the informal holiday mixer at the capital city branch headquarters, and one glass of passable office party wine had somehow turned into 3. The frantic dash through the rain-slicked streets to the metro station, the sharp ache in his chest had dismissed as exertion, the surge of adrenaline as Head seen the taillights of the last train pulling away. It all culminated in this moment, standing in the vestibule of carriage 3, heart hammering, breath ragged. He pushed through the door into the main compartment. It was confoundingly full for the midnight outbound to Northgate, his usual route to Metro Central. Usually, this late, the train was a skeletal thing, rattling through empty tunnels with only a handful of weary souls slumped in their seats. Tonight it was packed. Men in damp suits, women clutching bags, a scattering of younger faces lost in phones or headphones. A cross-section of late-night capital city, all bound for points north. He found an empty single seat by a window, easing himself down, the worn velour surprisingly cold against his suit trousers. He pulled out his phone, the familiar way to comfort. No signal. Expected, this deep underground but still annoying. He needed to check his email. Urgent response from the West Coast team pending. Sarah had texted earlier something about dinner. He hadn't replied. Head call her from a station. He looked around the carriage. The crowd was dense, yet strangely silent. No chatter, no laughter, not even the usual low hum of dozens of personal devices competing for attention. Just stillness. A man across the aisle, impeccably dressed, but with a newspaper dating from 3 days ago folded neatly in his lap, stared straight ahead with an unnerving placidity. Further down, a woman in a sensible tweed coat sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And nestled between 2 adults, a little girl in a bright red jacket sat utterly motionless, her eyes wide and fixed on something Michael couldn't see. Break time equals 0. 7S / the train lurched, pulling away from the platform with a groan that felt less like mechanics and more like protest. They plunged into the inky blackness of the tunnel. The lights in the carriage flickered, the familiar fluorescent buzz faltering. In that brief, strobe-like sequence of light and shadow, the faces of the passengers seemed to shift, to lose definition, becoming hollowed out, indistinct forms. Michael blinked, and they were normal again, just tired people on a late train. He ran a hand over his face. He was exhausted. Stress. Lack of sleep. Too much coffee, then too much wine. It was playing tricks on his eyes. The train gathered speed, the rhythm of the wheels on the track settling into a hypnotic clatter. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, leaning his head against the cool glass of the window. Just a few stops. Metro Central. Then home. Sarah had apologized again about dinner. A sudden, deep chill permeated the air, cutting through the stagnant warmth of the carriage. Michael shivered, opening his eyes. The temperature had plummeted noticeably, and the silence of the passengers was no longer just odd. It felt intentional, heavy, like a physical weight pressing in on him. He looked out the window. The expected rush of the tunnel wall was absent. Instead, there was only blackness and absolute, consuming dark that seemed to press right up against the glass. No lights, no cables, nothing to indicate they were moving through a subway tunnel. He sat up straighter, a prickle of unease turning into a cold crawl of apprehension down his spine. Something was profoundly wrong. This wasn't the metro line he knew. This wasn't Capital City. He tried to catch the eye of the woman beside him, a middle-aged woman in a plain gray suit, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window. "Excuse me," Michael said, his voice feeling thin and reedy. "Do you know, are we on the usual route to Metro Central?" She turned her head slowly, her movement oddly stiff. Her face was pleasant, unremarkable, dominated by large, vacant eyes. A faint smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The usual route?" she repeated, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "No, not tonight." "But where are we going?" The smile remained fixed. "We're simply proceeding." Proceeding? To where? Michael's heart began to beat faster, a frantic, uneven rhythm in his chest. He looked at the other passengers. All were still watching him, their faces unreadable. The little girl in the red coat hadn't moved, her dark eyes like polished stones. The train continued to move, the click-clack of the wheels the only sound in the profound silence. Michael felt a wave of panic rising. This wasn't a detour. This wasn't just being lost. There was something deeply, fundamentally wrong about this train, about its passengers, and about the absolute blackness that lay just inches beyond the glass. He had boarded the last train of the night, but he was beginning to suspect it wasn't just the last train of the schedule. It might be the last train, full stop. Part 2. Passengers in Limbo. Panic clawed at Michael's throat. He had to get off. This wasn't right. He stood abruptly, startling himself with the sudden movement in the static carriage. "I need to get off," he said, louder this time, his voice betraying a tremor. "This isn't my train." The old man with the newspaper finally lowered it, his gaze settling on Michael. His eyes were the palest blue, almost translucent. Once the doors closed, he said, his voice dry and rustling like dead leaves, "There are no stops for you." "What are you talking about?" Michael demanded, taking a step into the aisle. He looked towards the doors at the end of the carriage. The red emergency handle was there, but it looked faded, somehow unreal. "The journey has begun," the old man continued, unperturbed, "and you are a passenger." Michael moved towards the doors at the front of the carriage, needing to find a conductor, a map, any sign of normal operation. The aisle felt longer than before, the silent passengers seeming to recede from him as he walked. He reached the door to the next car. The small window showed only the same scene repeated. Rows of silent figures, their reflections faint against the profound darkness outside. He grabbed the handle. It was locked, cold and unyielding. He tried the door to the rear carriage. Also locked. He was trapped on a train with silent strangers and a route that led into absolute blackness. He turned back to face the carriage, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Someone tell me what is going on." It was the little girl in the red coat who answered, her voice soft but carrying with chilling clarity through the silence. "You don't remember, do you?" Michael stared at her. "Remember what?" "How you got here," she said, her solemn eyes fixed on his. "I ran for the train," he said, shaking his head, "from the station. I almost missed it." "Before that," the old man prompted, "what happened before you ran?" Michael tried to think. The party, the meeting, emails, phone calls, the usual chaotic blur of a workday. But something felt missing, a blank space. He remembered the sharp ache in his chest, the one Head ignored, the dizzy spell just before Head left the office. He put it down to exhaustion, skipped dinner, just wanted to get home. There was a feeling, he said slowly, grasping for the memory. Pressure, like indigestion, just before I left. The woman in the gray suit spoke, her smile still fixed. Indigestion can be deceiving. The teenager with the headphones around his neck finally removed them, letting them rest on his shoulders. He looked directly at Michael, his young face etched with a weariness that seemed too old for him. "Mine was fast," he said, his voice flat. "Didn't even see it coming. Stupid." "Mister." Silas nodded. "Accidents," he said, "sudden and unforgiving." "Mine was slow," said Eleanor Vance, the woman in the gray suit. "Years of treatments. A quiet fade." "Illness," Silas acknowledged. "A long, weary road." The little girl, Lily, spoke again. "Mine was quick, like falling asleep." Michael looked from one to the other, a terrible understanding beginning to dawn. The silence, the stillness, the impossible route. These weren't just strange passengers. They were. "You," Michael whispered, the word catching in his throat. "You're all gone." Silas nodded. "We have finished our time," he said simply. The truth hit Michael with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He wasn't just on a strange train. He was on a train of the departed, and he was one of them. The ache in his chest, the dizziness, the blank space in his memory. A sudden, silent heart attack on the platform, in the carriage. The exact moment was lost, but the terrifying consequence was here, now on this train. He stumbled back to his seat, collapsing onto the cold velour. He looked at his hands, flexed his fingers. They seemed real. He felt the fabric of his suit, the pounding of his heart. No, not his heart, just a phantom echo of panic in his chest. He was a ghost, a shade, trapped on a spectral train with other souls who had already made their exit. The mystery of the train's destination was terrifying, but the immediate, horrifying mystery was his own presence here. How had he arrived? And why was he still conscious, still thinking, when his life was irrevocably over? He was a passenger in limbo, and the ticket punch felt terrifyingly real. Part 3. Echoes of the Living World. The profound shock began to recede, replaced by a chilling sense of unreality and a desperate need to understand this impossible existence. Michael spent what felt like an eternity simply watching the others. The silent commuters were no longer commuting, but simply were existing in this strange, transitional space. He found himself talking to Silas more, the old man's quiet resignation a strange comfort in the face of cosmic horror. "Why here?" Michael asked one moment, staring out at the unyielding blackness beyond the glass. "Why a train?" Silas shrugged, a subtle movement that seemed to disturb the still air around him. "Forms the living understand, perhaps. A journey is easier to comprehend than simply ceasing. But where's the journey going? Ah, Silas said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. The eternal question. Some believe it leads to judgment, some to peace, others to merely dissolving back into the fabric of whatever comes next. You don't know? We are passengers, not conductors, Silas replied. We ride the line. Michael also spoke more with Eleanor Vance and Leo. Eleanor described the strange detachment that came with her illness, the way the world of the living felt increasingly distant even before she boarded the train. You make your peace, she said softly. You say your goodbyes, or you try to. Leo, the teenager, was more restless. He paced the aisle occasionally, running a hand through his hair. It's messed up, man, he muttered. One minute you're just driving, listening to tunes, thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. The next, this no warning, no chance. His unfinished business felt raw, immediate, the sudden snatching away of a young life. And then there was Lily. Michael found himself drawn to the little girl's quiet presence. He sat across the aisle from her, speaking in hushed tones. Lily, he said softly, you said I don't remember how I got here. Do you? She nodded, her dark eyes wide. I was sleeping, she whispered, and then I woke up here. The kind lady, she gestured towards her mother, who sat nearby, still and silent, was holding me. Were you sick? Lily shook her head. Just time to go. Her innocence in the face of their shared reality was heartbreaking. Michael wondered about her unfinished business. A child's life cut short. What could she possibly have left undone? He thought again of Sarah. The anniversary had forgotten. The dinner had missed. The argument they'd had last week about his hours, his constant distraction. He'd said things he regretted. She'd looked hurt, had intended to make it right. Always tomorrow. But now, tomorrow would never come for him. That was his unfinished business. The unspoken apologies, the unexpressed love, the failure to prioritize the one truly important connection in his life. The gnawing regret was a phantom limb, aching with a pain far worse than the physical one that had likely ended his life. As the journey continued, the absolute blackness outside the windows began to subtly shift. A faint, gray luminescence appeared, slowly resolving into shapes. Trees, skeletal and dark, standing in an endless, rolling landscape. Hills draped in mist that glowed with a soft, silver light. It was beautiful and desolate, a world apart. The in-between, Silas called it, where the veil is thin. Michael spent hours watching the landscape drift by, the gentle sway of the train, the unnerving silence broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. He saw fleeting, indistinct shapes in the mist, other figures, walking, standing, waiting. He couldn't be sure. He questioned Silas further about the unfinished business. Does everyone have it? Michael asked. Everyone leaves something behind, Silas said, looking out the window. A word unspoken, a deed undone, a connection unresolved. For most, it is not enough to tether them here for long. But for some, he trailed off, gesturing around the carriage. For us, it is significant enough that the train pauses before the final leg. Pauses? For what? Silas turned back to Michael, his pale eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been weary hope. For a chance, he said, a final echo. To reach back across the divide. Reach back to the living? The idea was both incredible and terrifying. Could he truly send a message to Sarah? Could he somehow, from this spectral train, bridge the gap between death and life and let her know what he hadn't said? The possibility, however remote, was a spark in the pervasive gloom of his new reality. It was the only thing that mattered now. The mystery of his death, the destination of the train, all paled in comparison to this one desperate chance to resolve his most profound regret. He had left his life unfinished, and the train, in its mysterious way, seemed to be offering him a single, impossible opportunity to try and find a fragile sense of completion. Part 4. The Final Transmission. The gray, misty landscape outside the windows began to change again, the silver light intensifying, pushing back the gloom. The abstract shapes resolved further, taking on the distinct, if slightly ethereal, forms of buildings, streets, familiar landmarks. Michael leaned closer to the glass, his heart pounding with a frantic, unnatural rhythm. He recognized it, the distant, shimmering outline of Capital City. The skyscrapers, the bridges, the familiar curve of the river. The train, impossibly, was drawing closer to the world of the living. The alignment, Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. The train passes close now, where the veil is thinnest. Eleanor Vance sat straighter in her seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Leo stopped pacing, his eyes wide as he stared out the window. Lily's gaze was fixed and tense. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "This is the chance," Silas said, looking directly at Michael. "The chance to send your echo. If your unfinished business is tied to someone there, you focus. With all your being. On them. On the message. And it reaches them. It is not guaranteed," Silas cautioned, his voice grave. "The living are often deaf to us, wrapped in their own world. But sometimes a part of the message can be felt. In a dream, a sudden memory, a feeling they cannot explain. It is a whisper across the void. A whisper, a fragile, uncertain chance. But it was all he had. He thought of Sarah, her face etched with sadness as Head left for the party. The unspoken words hanging between them. The regret was a physical ache in his non-existent chest. He had to try. The train wasn't on any visible tracks now. It seemed to glide through the air, the misty landscape seamlessly blending with the familiar cityscape below. They were moving alongside the buildings high above the streets, yet somehow right there. And as they moved, Michael saw his neighborhood, his street, and then the small apartment building where he and Sarah lived. He could see their window. The light was on, and silhouetted against the light, he saw her, Sarah, sitting on the edge of their bed, phone in hand, her shoulders slumped. Even from this impossible distance, in this surreal moment, he could feel her sadness, her worry. This was it, his unfinished business, staring back at him across the gulf between worlds. He closed his eyes, blocking out the sight of the impossible juxtaposition, the spectral train gliding alongside their apartment. He needed absolute focus. Break time equals 0. 3s / he needed to channel every last vestige of his consciousness, his emotion, his love, into a single, desperate transmission. He pictured Sarah's face in his mind, her smile, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her hand. He focused on the last argument, the hurt in her eyes. He poured his regret into the image, the agonizing knowledge of what had lost, of what he hadn't said. And then he focused on his love. a love he had too often taken for granted, buried under the demands of work and the mundane stresses of life. He sent it all: the apology, the regret, the overwhelming, desperate love across the invisible barrier. Sarah, my love, I'm so sorry about everything. I wasn't there. I wasn't present, but I loved you. I love you more than you know, more than I ever said. Please, please feel this. Know this. He felt a strange, tingling sensation build within him, an intense concentration of energy pushing outward towards that window, towards Sarah. It felt like a part of him was being drawn away, a final offering. He held the focus, the desperate plea, for what felt like an eternity, the sound of the train a distant, irrelevant hum. This was his turning point, the attempt to bridge the chasm, the final transmission of a life's most crucial, unfinished truth. When the sensation began to fade, the intense focus giving way to weary emptiness, he opened his eyes. The train was pulling away from the building, the cityscape receding back into the swirling mist. He looked towards Sarah's window. Was she still there? Had she stirred? Had she felt anything? He couldn't tell. The connection, fragile and fleeting, was gone. The echo had been sent. Whether it landed, he would never know. The climax wasn't in the receiving, but in the desperate act of sending. He had faced his deepest regret and, from the edge of eternity, had tried to set it right. Part 5. The platform at the end of the line. The landscape outside the train windows continued to shift, the misty, ethereal realm asserting itself once more, pushing back the last echoes of the living world. The gray light deepened, becoming heavy and still. The air grew colder, the silence in the carriage more profound than ever before. Michael sat back, drained. The intensity of the transmission attempt had left him feeling hollowed out, an emptiness that went beyond the physical absence of a body. He had given his all for that one fleeting chance. The uncertainty of its reception was a dull ache in the background of his consciousness, a lingering question that would likely never be answered. Mr. Silas stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. Eleanor and Leo also rose, a quiet sense of finality about them. Lily remained seated, watching Michael. "We are nearing the destination," Silas announced, his voice flat, devoid of the slight warmth it had held when speaking of the chance. "The destination?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "The end of the line," Silas confirmed. "For this journey, at least." Michael looked out the window. Through the thickening mist, a structure was resolving from the gloom. Not a station, not a city. A platform. Built of dark, rough-hewn stone, ancient and weathered, standing alone in the desolate, misty expanse. There were no tracks leading up to it, no signs of engineering. The train simply glided towards it, an apparition arriving at an impossible destination. As the train drew closer, Michael could see figures standing on the platform, silent, still, more passengers who had completed their journey. Their forms were indistinct in the pale light, like shadows waiting patiently. "This is where we disembark," Eleanor said, her voice quiet. "Those whose journey on the train is finished." "Unfinished business," Leo added, a wry, sad smile touching his lips. "Resolved or accepted as unresolvable." Michael looked at Lily, who was still seated, her gaze fixed on him. "You're not getting off?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not yet," she whispered. "I wait for the next pass. Maybe Mama will feel it then." Her unfinished business was different, a child's simple, enduring love and hope for connection. The train came to a smooth, silent halt alongside the ancient platform. The doors hissed open, revealing the cold, still air outside, the scent of damp stone and mist. Silas turned to Michael. "Your echo was sent," he said. "Its reach is beyond our knowing now. You have faced what held you." Michael stood, feeling the cold certainty settle over him. He had tried. He had poured his last vestiges of life's energy into reaching Sarah. Whether it had worked was irrelevant to this moment. He had done the only thing he could. His journey on this train, tethered by that regret, was complete. He walked towards the open doors, Silas, Eleanor, and Leo beside him. As he stepped out onto the rough, cold stone of the platform, the air felt heavier, colder than inside the train. He turned back, watching the train. Lily was still there, a small, solitary figure in the window of the departing carriage. She raised a hand, a faint, almost imperceptible wave. "Goodbye, Lily," Michael whispered, though he knew she wouldn't hear him now. The train doors closed with a soft hiss, and the train began to glide away, back into the mist, its click-clack fading quickly into silence. Soon it was gone, leaving only Michael, Silas, Eleanor, Leo, and the other silent figures on the platform. Silas gestured towards the waiting forms. "They await," he said. "Await what?" Michael asked, looking at the indistinct figures. Silas didn't answer directly. He simply looked out into the vast, misty expanse beyond the platform, where the silver light seemed to stretch into an endless, unknown distance. The platform at the end of the line was not a bustling station or a gateway to light. It was a place of waiting, a place of silence. The lingering shadow wasn't just the uncertainty of his message reaching Sarah, but the profound, unsettling mystery of what lay beyond this cold stone platform. Was this the end? Or merely another transition, where the waiting figures' guides, or simply fellow passengers, stalled here indefinitely? Michael Sterling had completed his journey on the Phantom commute, his most crucial, unfinished business addressed across the veil. But as he stood on that ancient, solitary platform, surrounded by the silent departed, the true mystery of the journey, its ultimate purpose and destination, remained as vast and as chilling as the misty landscape stretching out before him. The train was gone, and the wait had just begun.